Well, good evening. I'm Jay Lenora Bressler, and welcome to the April 7, 2020 edition of the Bible Delight in the Details, as we are looking at what happened every day of Holy Week. Now, on Tuesday, something very interesting happened, and I'll be very candid with you. I never really understood it fully. I'm sure nobody really understands anything fully, completely this side of heaven. But I just want to say something. When you don't understand something, if you ask God to give you some insight, I'm going to tell you, He does. He does. And you know what it usually takes? It takes a little bit of study. That's what it takes. Because I really wanted to understand this, and I said, Lord, I need to understand this. And I just heard God tell me, just why don't you just read? Why don't you just pick up the Bible and read? Kind of like St. Augustine heard, pick up and read, right? So let's look at this, because I saw something here just because I read that I had never understood before. And I was like, oh my goodness, it's been here all along. So let's look at, we're going to be reading in Mark chapter 11. You will also find this in Matthew. They're almost identical. So we're just going to read from Mark. Now, Mark in chapter 11, we're going to pick up in verse 12. On the following day, now this would be Monday, actually, according to Mark. On the following day, which was Monday, when they came from Bethany, Jesus was hungry. And seeing in the distance a fig tree in leaf, he went to see if he could find anything on it. And when he came to it, he found nothing but leaves, for it was not the season for figs. And he said to it, may no one ever eat fruit from you again. And the disciples heard it. Now then it goes on and it talks about what happened on Monday, the cleansing of the temple. And then we pick back up in verse 20. And as they passed by in the morning, this would be Tuesday morning, they saw the fig tree withered away to its roots. And Peter remembered and said to him, Rabbi, look, the fig tree that you cursed has withered. And Jesus answered them, have faith in God. Truly I say to you, whoever says to this mountain, be taken up and thrown into the sea, and does not doubt in his heart, but believes what he says will come to pass, it will be done for him. Therefore I tell you, whatever you ask in prayer, believe that you have received it, and it will be yours. And whenever you stand praying, forgive if you have anything against anyone, so that your Father also who is in heaven may forgive you your trespasses. Now, if you stop right there, that's not a very satisfying answer, frankly, that Jesus gave them, because it doesn't really answer, well, how come you did this, sir? We don't understand. It's almost as if he's just saying, okay, yeah, when faith can move mountains, right? Faith can do all kind of things. But you know what I always say, you have to read it in context. Keep going. Read before and read after, and see if the context starts to make sense. So in that, and then we're going to back up, and I'm going to show you exactly what I saw, and I couldn't believe it. Okay, so we're going to keep on rocking here in verse 27. And they came again to Jerusalem, and as he was walking in the temple, the chief priests and the scribes and the elders came to him, and they said to him, by what authority are you doing these things? Or who gave you this authority to do them? And Jesus said to them, I will ask you one question. Answer me, and I will tell you by what authority I do these things. Was the baptism of John from heaven or from man? Answer me. And they discussed it with one another, saying, well, if we say from heaven, he will say, why then did you not believe him? But shall we say from man? And they were afraid of the people, for they all knew that John really was a prophet. So they answered Jesus, we do not know. And Jesus said to them, well, then neither will I tell you by what authority I do these things. Now, we're going to march on, okay? But I just want you to see this. Jesus had just done something amazing, right? He had cursed a tree, and the tree was completely withered up the very next day. So supernatural miracle had occurred. Okay, and when his disciples had said something, it was like, wow, what did he say? He said, have faith in God. And I tell you, whatever you are asking for can come to pass. Well, so what is he tying this to? He's tying it to faith in God. How can he do something like this? Because of a connection with God, faith in God. And when the Jewish leaders come up, they're asking him basically, how could you do this? And he's asking them, well, wise guys, you ought to actually know. Because when miracles are happening, you're supposed to be the religious leaders. You're supposed to be the ones that know. You've got all the answers. You love to think you know it all. So why don't you talk to us about this question? I got a question for you, which they had to say that they did not know. So they acknowledged that they didn't know. And they should have, this was a silly question for them to be asking, because as religious leaders, they had every evidentiary basis for knowing who Jesus was, what he was doing, and by what authority he was doing it. Now, you might say, well, that's interesting, but let's get back to the fig tree. Okay, so he's still there talking to these religious leaders, and we now go straight into chapter 12. And he began to speak to them in parables. A man planted a vineyard and put a fence around it and dug a pit for the winepress and dug a tower or built a tower and leased it to tenants and went into another country. And when the season came, he sent a servant to the tenants to get from them some of the fruit of the vineyard. And they took him and beat him and sent him away empty-handed. And again he sent to them another servant, and they struck him on the head and treated him shamefully. And he sent another, and him they killed. And so with many others, and some they beat and some they killed. He still had one other, a beloved son. Finally he sent him to them, saying, they will respect my son. Finally, but those tenants said to one another, this is the heir. Come, let us kill him, and the inheritance will be ours. And they took him and killed him and threw him out of the vineyard. What will the owner of the vineyard do? He will come and destroy the tenants and give the vineyard to others. Have you not read this scripture? The stone that the builders rejected has become the cornerstone. This was the Lord's doing, and it is marvelous in our eyes. And they were seeking to arrest him, but feared the people, for they perceived that he had told the parable against them. So they understood that in that parable that he had just told, they were the wicked tenants. What had they done? They were supposed to tend the vineyard, tend the plants. What would that be? That would have been Israel, the people of Israel, and the wisdom of Israel, the relationship, the special relationship that God had with Israel. And what had these leaders done? They had killed the prophets. And then when Jesus himself, the Son of God, was presented, what did we know they were planning and plotting to do? To kill him, just like this. And trust me, they got it. Now, you have to read that entire thing, and then you go back, and then you think about, what is this about this fig tree business? Well, I just went back and I did a search, and I read every place in the Bible that talked about figs. And figs are very interesting fruit. First of all, it is one of the 7 fruits of the promised land. It is along with wine and olive oil. Figs were daily staple. They were necessary for life. When we know that figs were actually in the Garden of Eden, because what was covering? What did the Adam and Eve try to use to cover themselves? Fig leaves. Fig trees are very plentiful generally, but they only they have a certain season when they are in bloom, and when you can eat the fruit. And when you read, you realize how the fig trees were so important all through the Old Testament. During King Solomon's time, it's said that he made cedars as plentiful as sycamore fig trees were in the foothills. And I did a little research, and I understand that the fig trees were often allowed to and planted to line the roads, which may have been exactly why Jesus saw it in the distance, is because the fig trees were often lined the roads, and people, as they were traveling, it was expected that you could reach up and you could take some fruit to refresh yourself on the way. And so this was very common. Now, what's fascinating is that if you read, just do this, just read about figs in the Bible, and what you're going to find is that God, over and over with his prophets, with Hosea, with Jeremiah, with Micah, with Amos, they all talk about the leadership of Israel as being like figs. And they also specifically, when God is saying that he's not happy with the way that the leadership of Israel is conducting itself, he threatens to do some things, including removing the figs and withering the figs. Now, understanding that, I didn't even realize this. Do you remember that there is a parable about the figs? I did not. I don't know how I missed this, but I have missed this my whole life. In Luke chapter 13, this is prior to Holy Week, Jesus tells this parable. Okay, and it's in the context of Luke chapter 13, and he's talking about the need to repent. And not to think that, oh, I'm better than you, and therefore I'm good to go. Now, and listen to this, Luke 13, verse 6. See, I'm so excited, I can't even speak. And he told this parable. A man had a fig tree planted in his vineyard, and he came seeking fruit on it and found none. And he said to the vine dresser, look, listen to this. Look, for 3 years now I have come seeking fruit on this fig tree, and I find none. Cut it down. Why should it use up the ground? And he answered him, Sir, let it alone this year also, until I dig around it and put on manure. And then if it should bear fruit next year, well and good. But if not, you can cut it down. Holy cow. What in the world do we make of that? Well, I'll tell you, this started to make sense to me. Because you see, here's the deal. When you were walking along the road and you needed refreshment, you needed sustenance, and you saw a fig tree with a lot of leaves on it, that was the fig tree claiming that it had figs. So when you saw the leaves, it was like the fig tree was bragging, come eat from me because I've got sustenance. I've got something that will refresh and nourish you. Jesus was not upset about the tree not having the figs so much as it was putting on the appearance of having the figs. Okay? In other words, it's just like those Jewish leaders. They were claiming that they were the way, that they were the truth, that they had the ticket to life. And yet, what were they doing to the people? They had ground down the people. They had put unnecessary burdens on the people. They were misusing the Gentiles. Remember, we talked about that yesterday, why Jesus was so upset and was cleansing the temple. They were not taking care of the poor. They were mistreating the poor. It was all about gain. They who should have been the sustenance, they who should have had the very words of life for the people, who claimed to have it, and they did not. They were like the fig tree that looked like was making promises of being fruitful and wasn't. And when you go back to the parable of the barren fig tree, as identified in Luke 13, you realize, what was that whole thing about? If you're not fruitful, you shouldn't be taking up space. And it's fascinating, isn't it, that in the parable, Jesus says, for 3 years I have come seeking fruit on this fig tree. He had come to Jerusalem throughout his 3-year ministry, and he hadn't found it. He hadn't found it, and he had been patient, but his patience was just about to run out. And so it's absolutely, I find this absolutely fascinating. So, I did not realize that even that was prophetic. If you go back and you read in Amos chapter 4, verse 9, Micah, chapter 7, Jeremiah, chapter 29, Hosea, chapter 2, verse 12, and then again in 9:10, it talks about how the Lord is going to strike down the fig trees. Why? Because the leaders of Israel are not doing what they should do. I didn't realize that fig tree thing was prophesied, but apparently it was many, many times. And Jesus fulfilled it to the letter again, and even had used a parable so people would understand what he was doing. And did the Jewish leaders understand what he was doing, what he was saying? Oh yes, my friends. It says it right there. They knew that it was all about them, and they didn't like it, and so they decided to kill him. And that, my friends, is what happened on Tuesday. I'm J. Lenore Bressler. Visit me tomorrow to find out, what did Jesus do on Wednesday of Holy Week. I hope you're having a blessed Holy Week. Bye-bye now.